to the cloud. Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Dawn Stone. I'm the Director of Community Impact and Equity Initiatives here at the Center for Nonprofit Management, where we amplify the voices of our community nonprofit leaders and organizations. So we are happy to have a suite of amazing panelists today. This conversation will be moderated by the one and only my brother, Ashford Hughes, from the Metro Nashville Public School System, the officer of all things equity. And we will also have Mary Lawrence Minch and Greg O'Loughlin and Dr. Ricky Gibbs here in concert. But before we get started, we want to just welcome you for being here and ask that you put your information in the chat. This is being recorded and it will be shared on our social media platform. And as we get started, the first thing I would like to do, in addition to welcome you, is to do a land acknowledgement. Land acknowledgements help us to identify and appreciate the space that we have that was currently and formerly and currently populated by our Native and Indigenous folks. So I want to acknowledge my gratitude for being able to live and work on the sacred ground belonging to our Native ancestors of Cherokee Nation, in addition to Chickasaw, Creek, Natchez, Shawnee, and Yuchi. And today I have to add a tribe where I am currently seated is in Tampa, Florida, home of the Tavaga and the Seminole tribe. May my work in this space demonstrate my commitment to justice, equity, truth, and peacemaking through shared storytelling and rituals from my Indigenous and African roots. We at CNM are committed to equity, inclusion, justice, and belongingness. We want to thank our consultants, researchers, curators, educators, and everyone here today to bring truth and light to the work. And we want to thank all of you for being here to lean into the knowledge, learn, unlearn, and relearn some things, and reverse the curse of systems of oppression that continue to prevent liberation of marginalized people around the world. And with that, Ashford, I will turn this session over to you.
Hey, thank you, Don. Thankful for CNM for allowing us again to have this opportunity. Good morning, good people. As Don said, I serve in Metro Nashville as the Executive Officer for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I also, throughout this community, serve as a mentor to my fraternity, to my Masonic organization, and to several others. I co-chair our My Brother's Keeper Network. So youth, particularly Black and brown young males, is something that I am passionate about, and I am thankful to be here with this great established and esteemed panel that we have today. As we get started, I am going to make certain that today we're going to be grounded in our next level of conversation. Our first conversation was an intro to equity and what we're doing. This conversation is going to be grounded in the area that we know where equity first and foremost exists, within that classroom, within that teacher. And then we know from there, we have the systems that we can create to continue to build equity for all of our students going forward. I want to recognize our panelists. And panelists, if you don't mind giving us the 30-second, the church real quick up on the stage and out kind of introduction of yourself, and then we'll get started. I'll start with Dr. Ricky Gibbs.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Ricky Gibbs. I have the honor and privilege of serving as principal at Warner Arts Magnet Elementary, located in Metro Nashville Public Schools. We're the only Arts Magnet Elementary in the city. Currently, we are a pre-K through 4 school, but next year we will be adding 5th grade, and we will be pre-K through 5.
Awesome. Mary, I'm gonna come to you next.
Unmute myself. All right. So I'm Mary Lawrence Minnick. I am the Chief Academic Officer for Lead Public Schools. We are one of Nashville's homegrown charter organizations here. We have 2 high schools and 4 middle schools and serve about 2,600 students right now. So I'm delighted to be here and to be part of this continuing conversation.
Awesome. Thank you for that. just for the point of reference too, I used to work with Mary in the mayor's office. Good people, always glad to see her as well. Greg, I'm coming to you, always on the move. Tell us what's going on, Greg, about yourself quickly.
Good morning. Thank you. Happy to be here. My name is Greg O'Loughlin. I am the founding executive director of the Educators Cooperative, a former MMPS teacher, a former teacher at a number of private schools around town. The Educators Cooperative is an independent nonprofit based here in Nashville. Essentially, we're a mutual aid network of resources, support, and development for all teachers working in public, private, and charter schools all over Middle Tennessee. I'm really looking forward to digging in today. Thank you.
Awesome. Man, before I start any process or when I'm particularly doing anything with young men and we have our opening ritual, I think it's important to always just do a check-in with everybody, right? There's been a lot going on from the state level, from the federal, here locally as well. We just got through in the first tier of an election cycle, waiting in August, but I want to check in. Mary, I'm gonna start with you at first. Just how are you doing physically, mentally, as we wind down the last couple of weeks of this semester? How are you doing? Just to check in with you on a scale of 1 to 10.
Woo. So I think I am good. I'm probably, feeling pretty good at about a 7. And let me tell you, not only am I re-energized by what I'm seeing at the end of the year and kind of how the last quarter has gone for our schools and our teachers and the energy and enthusiasm we've seen as we've closed out the year. I'll tell you personally that I have a child who is graduating from high school this year. And so I've been extra grateful for the work that I have seen Metro Nashville Public Schools pour into her and into the work that she's done, and also into all the families that are just like me working towards the graduation finish line. But also as I look at our students here at LEAD and see their excitement and the energy that comes along with that. It's been a rough year. I'm not going to lie to you. And some parts rougher than others. And so we're all exhausted, but equally as exhilarated.
Awesome. Greg, I'll ask you that question as well. Just checking in, man. Mental check-in with you.
Appreciate that. Yeah. Overall, pretty good. I feel really grateful to be a part of a conversation like this with such amazing people from the community. Teachers are exhausted right now, and it has been, as Mary said, one of the hardest years we've ever faced. After a year that we thought couldn't get more challenging, it turned out to be more challenging. So there is a sincere need for rest and restoration. So holding them in everything we do and all of our conversations is going to be an important part to maintaining that support.
Awesome. Dr. Gibbs, checking in with you.
Like I'll say all the time, brother, everything's everything in my world. I often sit in here. I've heard a lot of people say that this is the hardest year we've ever had. And, I've heard it so much that I think I'm beginning to struggle with it because I don't know if this is the hardest year I've ever had. I think it's a different year. I think the context has been different simply because this has been the hardest year we've had to have subs. But when we actually think about where we are in the state of education, I would actually say this has been the most interesting years. While I think that we have made a lot of progress because I think we're having conversations like this and more people are willing to dig in and have conversations around equity work and things that we need to do to really move the work forward. I think we're also shaking up some people who are uneasy around equity work, and they're starting to scream a lot louder and are putting things in place that are trying to be real strategic about disrupting any progressive movement that is happening where we are leveling the balance field. So I don't know if I would say that this is the hardest year we've ever had, but I will say this is definitely one of the most interesting ones because we've been screaming from the mountaintops, those of us who serve disenfranchised communities, about the inequities of education for years. We got to a point where everyone is starting to listen, and now movement is happening, and those who have sat in the privilege or who none of this, they've always stayed away from everything. They see that work coming, and I think that fear is starting to bubble up. So I think we're actually poised for a really interesting 22-23 school year when we see how some of these laws and things begin to shake out as we continue down this process.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for sharing that, man. I think I'm probably at a 7.5, 8, and not because it's been a difficult year. It's just once you begin to align yourself and you live in purpose, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in these communities, within our school and with our young people. So I'm just trying to go off of the commitments I made to myself as we were isolated in COVID, not to put too much on my plate. And sometimes the access that we've been afforded via these Zoom meetings makes you forget that you need to schedule bathroom breaks. You need to schedule times to eat in between these things, right? But there's so much going on. Have a third grader going into fourth grade, and he loves school. He's playing soccer out East Nashville. He's not really good. He's a grass watcher, and I'm trying to get him to be a soccer player and stop watching the grass. But man, everything is good. My 3-year-old is ready to go to school. Well, my wife is ready to get him in school. So everything is good. Everything is good. Thank you all for checking in with that. Look, I want to ground us in a quote as we move toward this conversation. And many of you have started to hear the phrase. You're starting to wondering what it means when you hear it bubble up in certain circles. But I want to ground us as we begin to talk about culturally responsive pedagogy, culturally responsive instruction. And what does that look like in the classroom? Why are we even talking about this, right? I want to ground us in this quote by Bell Hooks. The academy is not paradise, but learning is a place where paradise can be created. The classroom, with all of its limitations, remains a place of possibility. In that field of possibility, we have the opportunity to labor for freedom, to demand of ourselves and our comrades an openness of the mind and the heart that allows us to face reality, even as we collectively imagine ways to move beyond boundaries to transgress. Man, I love Bell Hooks for the thought leadership, but in her book, To Transgress, I think that is a quote that I want to ground us in, that possibility of what it looks like in the classroom. So, Mary Lawrence, I want to come with you first. With your work in the charter schools, how do you and the organization define racial equity in public education? And why do you feel it is important for education leaders to identify it, to name it, and then to address it?
Absolutely. So I think that one of the things that, one of the quotes that really has hit home with me, and I appreciate you sharing the work from Bell Hooks, but when we're looking at educational equity, we've done a lot of work on my team in grounding ourselves in the work of Elena Aguilar. And I don't know if any of you have, this is where I'm pushing forward a book, but in Coaching for Equity. Yep. And I want to pull up one of the quotes that, that I prepared for when I was preparing for today, and what we, really how we are thinking about this. And I want to make sure I get it right. So I'm pulling up my slide here. And basically, when we're looking at educational equity, our team and the academic team here at LEAD has grounded ourselves in the thought that educational equity really means that there is no predictability of success or failure that correlates with any social or cultural factor. So a child's educational experiences or outcomes are not predictable because of their race, ethnicity, linguistic background, economic class, religion, gender, sexual orientation, physical or cognitive ability, or any other socio-political identity marker. Aguilar goes on to say, educational equity means every child, every day, period. And we took on this work within our team as we prepare and we work with coaches within our buildings. And so we very intentionally sparked that conversation among those at the leadership level, because we feel like it starts here, and it moves through an organization this way as well. And we realize and value the need to have those difficult conversations around what racial equity really looks like, but also around what equity in general looks like for our students. So, so I think this is where we're coming from well, we've been coming from this place for a while, but this is the work that I've been doing and rooting our teams in this year, and that we are building upon as we work towards our coaching institutes and our teacher trainings coming up for the upcoming year. I'll also say that we have some of our schools that have also embarked on the journey with All Means All. So an organization that works with schools that typically focus on underserved population and help them figure out where their blind spots are, where their gaps are, and how they can better meet student needs. So we're very excited about that work as well.
Awesome. Dr. Gibbs, I'm gonna come to you and ask you the same question. How does Warner define racial equity in education, and why is it important for you as a leader to identify it, name it, and have your staff address it?
I'm gonna take that question from the inverse and start with why it's important for me. As a child that grew up in the middle of the inner city in Miami, in a family that was impoverished, I knew that the only way that I had a fair shot out was through a quality education. And when we started talking about equitable access to a quality education, that can't be defined based upon your socioeconomic status, your racial status, or your zip code. And that's critical for me. So I was fortunate enough to have educators who saw the big picture, who understood that they never needed to feel sorry for me, but instead, if they wanted to genuinely help me, it was all about ensuring that I received a world-class education. So when it comes to me and naming that work, it's personal for me because I know where I would have been if it wasn't for people who saw that bigger picture. So when it comes to the work that we do in education, especially here at Warner, and that what we try to push out to the greater Nashville community, it's all about removing the mirror. So we talk about this concept a lot, where you have students who genuinely only see what they see in the mirror. They see what's happening right in front of them. They see what's happening in their local community, in their family. And as educators, it's our responsibility to knock down that mirror or break that mirror and create that window where they can see far beyond what's right in front of them. They can see out for tomorrow's possibilities and really begin to dream about that better life, that better utopia, that better future for themselves. So we talk a lot about removing or breaking that mirror and creating that window, because it's about creating opportunities. It's about creating experiences. Because when we talk about equitable education, yes, we know that every child across our city has opportunities to engage in, wit and wisdom and Eureka and different math curriculums. But what we don't talk about is there are certain parts of our city who those boys and girls get to go to Titans games, get to go to the Adventure Science Center, get to go to the Frisk Center, get to go to TPAC. And that's just a normal Saturday or a normal Sunday for their families. Well, we have other students that the best they get to do is just to go outside and play. So when we talk about equitable access in education, it's about ensuring that we are taking students so that they can experience those things, they can see those things. And especially now that we're looking at a post-COVID educational structure where we are comfortable with technology and things of that nature. No longer is it okay to say, well, our school just doesn't have the money to go to this trip because everybody has it virtually now. So our boys and girls, and this is what the global society has created, that even if we can't go physically to experience something, we can experience it virtually. So now our boys and girls get to say, okay, I've seen that before. I've heard about that before. I've experienced that. And it begins to create that fair playing ground, because unlike all of us as learned adults, we all, when we were competing for jobs, I tell folks we competed regionally. So, we competed in our local cities or even our state or just in our area. Our young people that we are educating right now, they're going to compete in a global society. They're going to be competing with children from Asia, from Europe, from Africa. They're going to be competing for these global jobs because you can work anywhere in the world from wherever you are right now. We're all in a meeting together right now, and I'm in East Nashville. I may be the only one in East Nashville right now. So, so Greg's over here. So we're all able to create these spaces. So we have to make sure that we're knocking down that mirror, creating that window, so our boys and girls can have that experience and be a part of that global society.
Greg, I'm gonna come to you to answer that question quickly as well. What is Educators Cooperative? How do you all define racial equity in public education? Name it and address it.
Yeah, I think we're going to take it from a different angle. We're all looking at the same kind of question. The goal of erasing or eradicating social markers on educational outcomes requires the confluence of multiple systems. That those are systems that don't live in just the education system. So if we want to talk about the ways in which we're seeking to eradicate those social markers, that's great. But as EDCO, we are really focused on the direct action at the classroom level. So, at the leadership policy advocacy level, I think we can all look to decades of failure to look at an unbelievable amount of repeated effort and the repeated outcomes. And it's really frustrating to see that system, right, be so inflexible towards any sort of advocacy or change. And so our move and focus on the classroom level, identifying our discretionary power, is really the work of creating meaningful outcomes from culturally responsive pedagogy. That happens when teachers understand the work of rehumanizing the classroom. That's where we start to see, not at a let's fix all of society so that these multi-intertwined, multi-layered factors that result in kids not being able to go to, Titans game, or result in not having English speakers at home, having a bearing on their educational outcomes. That's at the classroom level. And that's where we focus our attention. And that work of rehumanizing education, of rehumanizing mathematics, of rehumanizing ELA, and culturally responsive pedagogy is where we see that lever to really have that meaningful impact of what the promise of Bell Hooks speaks to, of what Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings speaks to, of that work of creating culturally responsive classrooms.
Greg, I'm gonna stay with you here on this question as you talk into that. So Greg, what does it mean to be a culturally relevant practitioner? Why is this essential that this type of instruction take place in the classroom to create equitable student outcomes?
Well, I guess it depends on what we want school to do. And if we want school to create critical thinkers and school to create students with a deep sense of empathy and a commitment to their neighbors, to the least among us, then we need to teach in those manners. And we need to teach in a manner that is rooted in a fundamental honoring and praising of all of the funds of knowledge that walk into our classroom every morning. If we ask people to leave their home languages at the door because we have math to teach, we've left some of that humanity at the door, and we've put a judgment on what's going on. So it's essential if we want to have a society that is rooted in empathy and care, and perhaps the sorts of outcomes in which we can remove those social markers. So if those are valuable to us, then we need to teach our students, who are going to be our neighbors soon, in the same manner we hope to have those outcomes, centering the humanity of learning, of failure, of that learning cycle. All of those practices are vital if we want to get to that spot. Now, we can talk about what some of our neighbors, who may or may not have shared outcomes, but I would imagine people on this call all see that as where we need to head, where we need to go, as developing the types of students who are the folks we want to break bread with and be neighbors with and elect as leaders eventually one day. That's who these kids are. That's who we have a responsibility to. So that's the root of why that's important, to center the humanity of their learning and growth.
Thank you for that. Mary, I'm gonna come to you and ask you from your organization's perspective, what does it mean to be a culturally relevant practitioner in your organization, and why have you all made that an essential for student outcomes?
Sure, and I'll build upon what Greg has said in that we want our students to really know how to take charge of their learning and to really bring different perspectives and to be those kinds of critical thinkers. Now, I just said a lot of buzzwords. I know that right now, and I think a lot of being able to get students to that point really depends on how we are, what opportunities we're giving to our teachers to help get them there. So for us, we really are very focused on how we are coaching our teachers and what kinds of conversations that we are having with our teachers to help them understand where they may bring some of their own implicit bias into the classroom, and for them to understand the importance of those as Ricky was saying, those windows and mirrors that we have for our students. We've been, so I'll give you a couple of examples of the work that we've done. One is in the choosing of our ELA curriculum. And I may have spoken a little bit to this in our last meeting. We actually went through a process when we chose our ELA curriculum that engaged not only our teachers and our coaches and school leaders, but also our students and families, because we felt it was really important that our kids could have the opportunities to not only see themselves in the text in front of them, but also to see others and the differing kinds of experiences, and then to give them opportunities to build off those experiences and find their relevance in their own lives. So in implementing that curriculum across 4 middle schools, it's been really fascinating to see how the culture of the school building impacts the efficacy of the delivery of the curriculum. And so by that, you know, I'll get an example I can give is I had a conversation with one of our principals the other day about a particular text. And he said, you know, I think this is a really complex text. I think it's really difficult for our students to engage in. And my students are really struggling with this. And, you know, I'm not sure we're going to be able to get there. And by the fact that I had seen 3 other schools implement the same curriculum, I was able to say, but here's where I think you might need to tweak or, you know, what you're doing and how you might be able to engage your teachers in looking at this differently. Our mindset is very focused on the fact that children deserve access to grade level content. And content that is going to help them develop their skills to be able to engage productively in society, whatever that may look like for them. And so, so for us, I think part of being a culturally responsive practitioner is looking at yourself in the mirror, figuring out where your gaps are, and then having the courage and having the culture in your building to engage in those really complex conversations that may surround that.
Awesome. Dr. Gibbs, I'm gonna come to you with this one. Specifically looking at it from your lens as a principal, right? Can you explain the equity connection between the culturally relevant instruction and what you're seeing in the way that it eliminates opportunity and achievement gaps? I think right now as Mary Lawrence and others said, we have all these buzzwords out here, but like culturally relevant pedagogy isn't something that's new. But how are we now restructuring and framing that where we understand its connection to closing opportunity gaps and achievement gaps?
Yeah, so I ground this thought in a quote from probably one of my favorite football players of all time, Deion Sanders. You know, Deion told us, when you look good, you feel good. When you feel good, you play good. When you play good, they pay good. And folks think, oh, well, how does that make that connection? When we're talking about erasing some of those gaps and really looking at that culturally responsive work, is really about allowing our students to build confidence. And when we talk about building confidence, it's really about valuing the different cultures they come from. And Greg kind of hit on that point earlier. They can't just leave who they are at the door and say, well, now we need you to assimilate into this educational system that we've created that's built on middle-class white values. So you have to allow students to see themselves in text. If you're really wanting them to have an opportunity to engage in text differently, they have to see themselves in their teachers. They have to see themselves in school leaders. They have to see themselves in positions that are greater than where they are right now. And by doing that, we begin to build confidence. We oftentimes talk about, well, such and such isn't a good test taker, and that's why they can't show where they are. And most of the time we get to that point is because that person or those students are not confident. They lack confidence in something that has been ingrained in them because they have never seen themselves outside of where they are actually at. So when we start talking about having that culturally responsive work happening, it's about how are we working with our students to understand that they have value, but also as the educators, what are we doing to strategically take that approach to create those experiences where our students can see value in their cultures? Have we structured something outside of Black History Month to show our African-American students about their heritage? Or do we only wait till the month of February and we say, okay, well, now we're going to teach about Dr. King, Rosa Parks, Malcolm X, and look at different African-American inventors? Or is that a part of just as we teach history? When we just went past Cinco de Mayo, is this the only day that we celebrated our children that come from Hispanic cultures? There are opportunities to do that throughout the school year to show them that their culture has value. And if you can't start the process of saying you are a culturally responsive educator or you believe in culturally responsive strategies, if we're step one, not recognizing, naming, and valuing the cultures that our young people come from. So when we bring all that together, to me, step one is genuinely about ensuring that our young people understand that where they come from matters. And we're not looking to have them assimilate. We're really looking for them to understand who they are, value who they are, and become those critical thinkers that are willing to push the status quo.
Man, I'm gonna ground us again in another quote, just piggybacking off of what Dr. Gibbs said. This is a quote by Gloria Ladson Billings in a recent Ed Week report, Research Pedagogy in the Academy. Culturally relevant pedagogy is not just endorsing or validating the culture kids come with. It's giving them access to at least one other culture so they leave school at least biculturally competent. You are covering not just Black or brown kids, but white kids. White kids should not go out into a very internationally global workforce and only understand themselves or their culture. That's powerful. And that kind of piggybacks off of some of what Dr. Gibbs was saying. Greg, I'm gonna come to you with this question. Vitally important. What are the professional learning strategies that EDCO is utilizing or plans to continue to utilize to ensure educators demonstrate cultural competencies and display culturally responsive instruction daily in the classroom?
Thank you, Ashford. Thank you, Dr. Gibbs. I appreciate that. You really put a fine point on some of those classroom-facing issues that teachers are bringing to the space every day. I don't want to buck the system as far as the schedule goes. Some of the stuff I was prepared to speak about in a bit. We'll touch on that stuff. Do you want me to jump into that? Or do you want me to wait till the time is appropriate?
We can wait till that. Mary Lawrence, do you mind answering that question? What ways organization? What did I just ask? Okay, professional learning strategies that you all are working to ensure educators demonstrate these type of competencies.
Oh, absolutely. So making sure I was off mute. Absolutely. So when we are looking at our network level meetings, as well as all the way down into our school level meetings, one of the first things that we want to make sure that we are doing is that we are internalizing the lessons that our students are teaching. I mean, that our teachers are teaching, and we are really preparing for those, because every child deserves a well-prepared lesson that takes into consideration all of the things of which we just spoke. Where are the children going to see themselves? What misconceptions might be there? What do our kids need to see? What kinds of additions need to be made there? So first and foremost, I think we're looking at that lesson preparation. I'll also say that as I have been listening to our other panelists as well, I've wanted to jump in and say, and it's so important that we are working with those who are in front of our students to help them see every day that every action they take matters, and every word they say matters, their word choices, how, things that may be considered culturally inappropriate in one setting that are not, that we never have thought of before. And I'll give an example of in my previous work. We often used a phrase in translating that no one realized was offensive to our Arabic students, until finally a family was courageous enough to come in front of us and say, I don't think you think when this translates through, I don't think you realize it means what it means. So keeping in mind, keeping our ears open for families, and keeping the culture of the school in such a way, and of the organization as a whole, in such a way that we can have those conversations and we can call each other out on that. And so one of the most important things I think that we do with our teachers is we help them understand that if you see something that is that you perceive to be a racist action, say something. If you see something, you got to say it. You got to call it out, because people, you presume that people come from, unless it's an overt horrible thing, that people are coming from a place of positive intent. And so a lot of times people don't know what they don't know, and particularly new teachers who are coming in who may not have seen a world outside of where they practice, may not know what's happening. And I think about this a lot as I approach professional learning, and as I work with my team and we approach professional learning. I grew up in Monroe, Louisiana, which is a tiny little town in Northeast Louisiana, a very, very segregated, tiny little town in Northeast Louisiana. And so as we, I didn't know what I didn't know when I came through and started my education career in Jackson, Mississippi, and then ultimately moved on here in Nashville and began working with families from all around the world when I taught at Vanderbilt Children's Hospital. Taking those experiences and listening to families and listening to children and seeing their reactions and monitoring how they are receiving what you are teaching is so very important.
Dr. Gibbs, I'm gonna come to you with the same question. With Warner, how are you making certain that you have strategies to make sure educators are showing these competencies on a daily basis?
Yeah, so we decided to embark on this work on two fronts. We decided to embark on this work instructionally, as well as just how we're developing students. So when we talk about the instruction points, and I kind of hit on it already about as we dig into our curriculums, how are we creating those experiences that teaches our students that they have value, but also begins to kind of bring the greater world into their reality. While we have a growing population where we do have some students who come from means and have experiences, but we also have a significant number of students who come from an impoverished community that only see what they see. So, and based on and hitting on the quote that you said earlier, ensuring that our students are exposed to those multiple cultures has been critical in our work as we not only looked at the type of text that we're using, but also the experiences that we're bringing in. And then as we look at that whole child, obviously a lot of our work has been chronicled with our non-traditional approach to student discipline. And that work is genuinely teaching our scholars and giving them an opportunity to access a world that some of them that did not have those self-regulating skills would not have access to. When we start talking about culturally responsive as well as equity work, we also have to dig into the point where two things could be the same and two things could be different at the same time. We can say that we have two scholars that are both in the 4th grade, both are straight A students, but if one is a Black male and one's not a Black male, or we could just say one's a white male, the way that they would be interacted with if they're doing certain things in the community are significantly different if we're speaking truth. So when we talk about how we're helping our young people in this phase, teaching them how to self-regulate, how not to blow up at the first time something is said to you, how they can stop and breathe, is genuinely teaching them life skills so that way that they can be able to experience things in life and not make what we call that knee-jerk decision, and they pay for it for the rest of their lives. We oftentimes talk about how we have young people making permanent decisions based upon temporary emotions. So part of our work on the equity lens and getting students to truly understand that their own power is to teach them how to self-regulate and harness that power. Because if we're making those quick decisions where they're just going about doing things and it's not and it ends up putting them in a penitentiary or something like that, we don't begin to garner that true strength. So again, looking at it on both ways, not only instructionally, but how we're growing students, but more so with our educators on really pushing them to create those experiences. And if you hear nothing else, I'll tell people, when you're wanting to really show a child their true worth and create that equitable education for them, if it's not grounded in experiences, we're missing the mark.
Man, I know we're going to transition to Greg here in a second, but Dr. Gibbs, I want to stay with you, and if you can, in 2 minutes, and Mary, I ask you in 2 minutes as well. What is there a space that community, we have community on here, and I believe we probably have more community than educators on the call, but what is the space that the community can play in this when we talk about addressing racial inequities, but then coming in and making certain that community is culturally responsive and aware of things going on, and how could they support what you're doing at Warner?
Yeah, so I'm a believer in community. So I will tell you, I'm that person, that educator that I was raised by the grown folks that said it take a village to raise a child. I'm part of my mission in education is to dispel one of the greatest lies ever told in education, where we try to tell educators to only focus on what happens in between our four walls and let the community handle what the community handles. I just don't believe that. I believe we are all in this thing together, because what happens in the community, it begins to find its way into the school, and what happens in the school finds its way back out into the community. So as we talk about community members and what we can do, first things first, engage with your local school. I'm a believer in understanding what school is right there in your local community. If you have time, volunteer to read with students. I'll tell folks, and this isn't a major time commitment. We're talking 30 minutes a week. Pick one day a week that you can be consistent with, because one thing that I know for certain, and two things for sure, children thrive on expectations and consistency. They need expectations and consistency.
So hold up, Dr. Gibbs, hold up. Say that one more time for the people way in Southeast Nashville.
Yeah, I say one thing's for certain, two things for sure. Children thrive on expectations and consistency. So if we're truly looking at, as a community, wanting to create these experiences for our young people, we can select one day a week for 30 minutes to just volunteer to read, sit down and just speak with the child at your local school. That will do wonders for opening a child's world, closing some of those educational, academic, as well as equity gaps. But then two, it also shows our young people there's a Beth that lives in my community that doesn't look like me, that loves me. There's a Abby that lives in my community. I may not know her, but she's praying for me. There's a Melissa that lives in my community that may not have any connection to my family, but she wants to see me succeed. That's how, as a community, we begin to engage everybody and make this work full circle to show our young people that even though I may not live in your house, I may not know you by name, but I'm celebrating you and I want you to succeed because you're a part of my community.
Man, thank you for that. Mary, I'm gonna put a pin and hold it, come to you. Because for time, I want to shift to Greg. And Greg, everybody, Greg is gonna take us a couple of minutes through a kind of a skit of sorts, exercise. I think, I wonder, really grounding us in this conversation around culturally responsive pedagogy and seeing it from a teacher's lens, because from my vantage point, equity, I am an administrator focused on equity, but I am 5 steps away from a child. So I have to help create the conditions by giving the educators the tools to be able to do this day in and day out in support of them, knowing they are professionals. But how can we all utilize that adult learning theory to make certain we get what we need to support our children? But Greg, I'm gonna turn it over to you for these next few minutes.
I appreciate that, Ashford. Thank you. I do want to give another shout out to Dr. Gibbs. And we were lucky to take a group of teachers from all over the city for a field trip to observe the magic that happens at Warner recently. And I don't want to say it's magic, because magic, you don't know how it happens. It happens with hard work and dedication, consistency and expectations. And to see it in the hallways and to feel it in the classrooms is completely mind-blowing. Dr. Gibbs, you have created something there that is, if you can figure out how to replicate that nationwide, it will be a better place. It is purely amazing. Your staff and yourself have dedicated yourself to those students in a way that's, I hope, catches fire. And I did overachieve here a little bit. I mean, I'm a teacher, so I kind of prepared a few remarks. Kind of, I want the A. I want to get the A on this one. I'll take notes and at the end. So excuse a little bit the overachieving, the prepared remarks portion, but there is a section that'll be a little bit more interactive as well. So I'll save us there. I did introduce myself and talk a little bit about how the Educators Cooperative is an independent nonprofit based here in Nashville. We started our work in 2016. We've since grown to include about 200 members. We support 70,000 students in Middle Tennessee, and we have teachers working in nearly 300 schools in the area. We offer workshops throughout the year. We offer many workshops, most recently some things like, is this for a grade? Authentic assessment, follow me, how to draw the line with students in social media, anti-racist teaching workshops we've hosted since 2019. EL instruction in STEM. We have hosted an open workshop on identifying white supremacy culture in classroom and school practices every Tuesday for the past 3 years, open to all teachers. Now we just concluded our last one this past Tuesday. So we have also created opportunities for small group work with teachers in Nashville, with Dr. Gloria Latson-Billings, Rochelle Gutierrez, Jose Luis Vilson, Dr. James Lowen. We brought these folks in for small group workshops, the teachers, over the past 3 years to focus on this work specifically. The work of Educators Cooperative is direct action work, right? We do not engage in advocacy. We do not engage in policy. Our efforts are classroom facing. We are focused on ensuring that no good idea gets stuck in any one classroom, any one school, or any one sector. We're also entirely for teachers by teachers. Our board of directors, our advisory committee, our staff, our employees are either active classroom teachers or teachers taking leave from the classroom. And so today I'm hoping to address specifically equity from the perspective of the classroom, and namely who we are teaching and why. Because either schools are for all caps, all kids, and I mean kids of all kinds, or schools are for white, straight, cisgendered kids. And it's a pretty clear line. If they're for all kids, right, then we have an obligation to create the types of classrooms and the classroom communities and cultures that are welcoming, safe, supportive, and engender a shared sense of belonging for every kid equally. Right? That's our charge. That's our obligation as teachers. This obligation is not born of a law or a commissioner or a governor. It is not granted to us by a diploma of a graduation or by a hashtag on Appreciation Week. It is born of the role we play in society, right? Our obligation as teachers is to the general public. It's to our neighbors, to our families, and primarily to our students. Because the outcome of all education is public. There are no jobs for which only charter school graduates can apply. There are no jobs for which only public school graduates can apply. There are no elections in which only private school graduates can participate. The outcome of all education is public. That's something we will say over and over again. The fact is that the root of our obligation is to teach all students how to ask creative questions, how to research for thoughtful answers, how to take risks, how to fail productively, how to brush yourself off and try again. All kids equally. Is there anyone on this call who believes that a classroom culture that is crafted to ensure that a non-binary Hispanic student whose parents immigrated to the States 2 years ago and is the only English speaker in the house requires the same type of classroom culture that is engineered for the success of a white, cisgendered, heterosexual male student? Can that be the same engineering in mind? Does anyone on this call think that one of those kids deserves a better education than another kid? One of those kids deserves a better, I would hope. I'm a lot of cameras off, but I imagine there's a lot of like this going on. No, we don't believe that. That's what I imagine. I would hope no one on this call believes that. So if it's true that teachers need to work on the development of a classroom in which both of those students can learn freely, can learn openly, and in a manner that allows both of them to be their whole selves in the process, then it is true that we have an obligation to provide a learning environment that is focused on three things. Right. Number one is why we go to work every day, to prioritize student learning. It's what schools do. We have standards, activities, themes, goals in all subject areas, and it is vital. Like, the most important thing that our students develop the experience, understanding, and mastery of those skills and concepts that we teach every year. That's our primary responsibility. In order to create a classroom environment that prioritizes student learning, right? Because you can't just say, I'm going to teach you something. You have to create a culture of learning, failure, and growth. We need to develop a classroom that, two, values and nurtures the languages, experiences, and perspectives of the homes and lives of all of our students. An environment in which students feel safe is an environment in which a student can learn. If a student is worried that they're going to be made fun of for being different, or that they're not going to have access to essential critical thinking parts of their brains needed to learn new material. If a student is embarrassed by their accent or by the fact that they might be the only English speaker in their home, they're going to be less likely to fully engage, to participate and connect with their classmates and their teacher. Nurturing these elements, what we call funds of knowledge, right? What you bring into the classroom with you, all the assets, all of the experiences and cultures that walk through that doorway into your classroom, they need to have a safe place to exist, to be engaged, and to be celebrated. And when that focus on student learning is combined with that cultural competency, amazing things can happen in a classroom. But there's still one more piece, the larger context of what we're doing, the why of our learning. And that's the third piece, the critical consciousness. If students do not understand why they are learning something, it is easy for that learning not to stick beyond the quiz or the classroom. Learning absent all context is learning without meaning. Meaningful learning is the type of learning that is rich, connected, as the root of an informed, caring, empathetic, and capable public. Because let's not forget, we're teaching for public outcomes. If we want those learning outcomes to have positive public impact, we need to contextualize that learning in a larger cultural context. So when I say a term, we teach to cultural competency, what culture do you think I'm referring to? I mean, that's the question as teachers we have to ask. What culture does a teacher have an obligation to teach? White heteronormative culture that fought school integration for decades? That's a heck of a choice. The culture born of the Black experience in Nashville, that is a choice we can make. When do we start that? And when do we bring that into our classroom? The culture born of the neighbors and communities of recently arrived Hispanic immigrants. What culture should be the predominant culture in a teacher's classroom? And it's a trick question. Teachers love that stuff, right? There's none of the above. There's not a specific culture we need to be teaching, right? Which is, I think, what a lot of folks who are afraid of all this stuff are fearing, right? We have an obligation to create students who can ask questions, conduct research, apply critical thinking skills, and contribute based on their own conclusions. That's our obligation. We meet that obligation when we teach real history, when we teach whole stories, when we support investigation and queries into topics, events, and people that our students want to learn about. And how can we do that in a time when teachers are facing greater limitations on our practices? How can we do that in a time when some of our neighbors feel comfortable going to school board meetings and screaming at teachers and threatening school board members? How can we do that when some of our neighbors are comfortable organizing and attending literal book burnings in our neighborhoods? I'd ask, in fact, the question is, how can we not? The reality is that we have an obligation not to a political party or not to an ideology, but to the curiosity and creativity of our students. That is where, as a teacher, I derive my, and I'll use quotes because it's not given to me, my permission to exercise creative insubordination and to flex our discretionary power. Right? You can ban books and you can ban topics. They might fear truth being exposed, narratives that paint them in a poor light, or analysis that concludes things that make them embarrassed, but they can't ban primary sources. And that's kind of where I'm going to bring this to the classroom right now. In fact, every single grade in the state of Tennessee, from kindergarten to 12th, requires students to, quote, progress through an inquiry cycle by analyzing primary sources to construct and communicate conceptual understanding of the content standards and to develop historical and geographical awareness. They have a short list of suggested primary sources, but it says plainly it is not exhaustive. And I will share a very boring link if you want to print that one out. It's the Tennessee State Standards, kindergarten through 12. So my hope here, the part that's kind of something that we can do in our classroom, because the fear isn't that, this is kind of to the note regarding like the community members, right? Like, because the risk a teacher takes to do this work, and the risk is great right now. The risk is material, and it is something that is preventing many of our members from sleeping soundly at night. There's an intense fear, and there has been a sincere chilling effect on this work and in the practices of our members and in teachers all over the city. We have an opportunity to exercise discretionary power. We have an opportunity to be creatively insubordinate. So an activity that utilizes primary sources, right? I've engineered this one because I assumed we'd all pretty much be adults. This is not appropriate for like a kindergarten setting. The protocol is you can use this lesson, you can use this activity in any setting using any primary source. And in the younger grades, when identity is still developing and the chief, childhood development markers are more inward facing at that younger stage, there's any number of things you could switch this to internally. But the practice of see, think, wonder allows our students to become the engineers of their questions and of their learning. When they are put in the driver's seat and told that their questions matter and their curiosity is important, that's how we can say, well, I was answering the question of a kid. How might you tell me that I can't teach or answer questions of my students that ask me in this classroom? So if you would, this is a common classroom practice, right? I have the permission available here to share my screen. I'll walk you through quickly the protocol. We're gonna do see, think, wonder, right? And in this instance, because we all have jobs to do, we all have work to do, and we have to get back to. We're not going to do the full 5 minutes per each one. We'll try to shorten it down to like maybe one minute per section, and we'll break it down a little smaller. But we're going to take 3 individual sections. In this first section, I'm going to show you a photograph of Glenn Elementary School, which is not too far, I think, from Dr. Gibbs, right? We're over there in East Nashville. It's an older photograph, but I'm like thinking back. My dad was probably 13 at this time. We were up in the Bronx, nowhere near Nashville. We're not in this photograph. It's a different thing. But there's folks we can talk to who would have memories of this kind of stuff. And the first thing we're going to do is write down all of the things we see. If you have a pen and paper, or have, I don't know, whiteboard or marker, or even just playing along and pretending like it, that's fine. Whatever you got in front of you. We're just going to focus on what we see in this photograph. The second thing we're going to do is walk through for 60 seconds and write down everything we think about that photograph. What do I think I'm seeing here? What do I think is happening here? What do I think? What conclusions can I draw based on this here? And then the final minute is going to be focused on wondering. What do I wonder? What is it I'm curious about? What do I want to know more about? So if with your permission, and I guess I'll look for a thumbs up from Dawn. Thank you. I'll share this. I'll share this photograph of Glenn Elementary School. Let's see here if that works. And we'll spend about 60 seconds. I'm not sure if you guys can see that there down the street from you, Gibbs. We can see this assemblage. I'm gonna watch my watch. There you go. I'm a poet. And in 60 seconds, I'd like you to write down everything that you see in this photograph. If you're drawing conclusions, keep that for the next section. This is strictly observation. We'll say about 10 more seconds for the C part. I'm going to ask you to write down whatever you're finishing writing there for the C portion of this activity, and we're going to drop into think. What do you think about this? What conclusions can you draw based on what you saw? What do you think is happening? Again, I'll put 60 seconds on my watch, and we'll try to draw conclusions about what we think is happening here. About 10 more seconds to come up with a couple of more conclusions or assumptions or what you think is happening in this picture. And then we're going to move on now to wonder. What do you wonder about this picture? What do you want to know more about? What questions do you have after spending some time with this primary source of a photograph of this elementary school in East Nashville? What do you wonder about? The context, the people, the setting? What research questions could you ask using this as your primary source? About 10 more seconds. All right, pencils down. We get paid a nickel every time we say that as teachers. Pencils down. Thank you very much for participating in that. I'm really grateful for your engagement with that activity. Does anybody want to share what that experience felt like, or perhaps something that they think or wonder or even see?
Feel free to unmute and jump right on in.
So I'll get the conversation started, Greg. Couple things I noticed. Mostly white men, few women, few children. It was a sign, you know, keep our white schools white. But normally, if it's the KKK, I used to see 3 Ks, but it was 4 Ks. So that was kind of strange to me. But then there was a black guy standing right in the middle. So I'm wondering, could that picture been like against, like, what was it, pro segregation? It was against segregation, I don't know, but to have a sign that references the KKK, but then a black guy in the middle of it with, I don't know, it kept my mind spinning. So I'm interested in seeing more information about it.
I think what kept me, what really interested me about this photo is, again, I didn't pick up on the 4th K. So I picked up on the 3. My mind went straight to the 3. But the level of just relaxed, what appeared to be, you know, a happy kind of event. That was really, it kind of distorted what I saw in the sign versus the event that was occurring, which made me wonder, how am I perceiving this? Am I perceiving it in the right context? The same as Ricky said. And then I also wondered about the book the man was holding, because immediately I thought, is this a Bible? What's happening here? And so that was my other kind of wonder in there.
Anyone else want to come unmute? I see some heads nodding. Let's hear from someone else in our lovely gallery.
I'll mention a couple of things. It seemed like the white members of in the picture were various socioeconomic status because of their clothing. They said that's what it appeared to me, and that it was, like Mary Lauren said, it was kind of a peaceful, happy atmosphere, which is very in opposition to what I experienced when I was going through desegregation in Louisville. It was not peaceful at all. And so I do wonder, you know, what really happened after that picture was taken? Was it still peaceful? And did they end up desegregating? And who were the leaders of it? You know, I just wonder about some of the outcomes.
I would love to hear from everybody. I am trying to keep an eye on the time, and I see Ashford looking at. I know I'm eating up your time there. I'm sorry for the schedule. I will say how grateful I am to everyone who shared and reflected out loud. It means a lot to me that we were able to step into the space of being a student momentarily and try to remember what it feels like to be wondering and curious and want to know more information, which was the purpose of this activity. As teachers, we now have an open door. We now say, okay, great. The good news is I don't know the answer to any of those questions. I don't know what was happening there, Dr. Gibbs. I don't know what's happening with us. But what I do know is that I'm supposed to teach you how to research. So let's go find out together, and you will hold my hand and we will go that way, right? The crux of this issue, though, the real heart of this, though, is consider, if you can for a moment, and I know no one likes to, I don't like to, like thinking back to like hormones and middle school and dating and maybe a little hungry and maybe someone yelled at you in the hallway or maybe you don't know where your homework is. What are the conditions I need to create as the teacher to make it so that you feel comfortable to ask some big questions, right? Am I going to be stupid if I say, why is there a 4th K on that sign? I don't want to say that. I'm going to be called stupid. In a lot of classroom settings, that's going to be what happens. If I can create a classroom culture that is welcoming to all sorts of questions. I don't even know what KKKK stands for. Can anyone tell me that? If you can create a classroom culture where that's a safe question to ask and people don't scoff and laugh, but say, ooh, I don't know either because I've never seen 4, but let's find out together. That's a good idea. That's what we're working for. That's culturally responsive classroom. If every kid in your class, all students, feel the same empowerment to ask those questions. If you know how we preface our own questions with, I don't want to ask a stupid question. No, we do want to ask stupid questions. We do want to ask questions that you might think are stupid, because that's where we spark more learning. When would you feel safe to ask a question that is really rough around the edges, but with some time with a teacher, you can polish that up to make a sincerely powerful research question that is so worth it. And those are the circumstances that are the classroom cultures that teachers need to create. Teachers create that culture. We can use primary sources, and we can nurture academic curiosity safely in all students. And that's the work that teachers do to meet our obligation. And that's the way teachers teach all students. Thank you very much for carving out some of that time there and playing along with that activity with me today. Thank you.
And absolutely, thank you for that, Greg. We definitely want to circle back again as a community. And I know you do this with your educators. And I know that Melissa, shout out to Bookham, spoke out about how can community and volunteers be trained in this work as well. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I meant to say, like, I don't know the clear answer, but I know you're playing with house money, right? Like, if I start to push that button a little too hard, I'm gonna hear about it, and if I start to hear about it, I'm probably gonna be less likely to do that. You can play dumb, and you can say, I didn't know. You can't talk about the truth like this. That's weird. I'm still gonna read the book I brought, though. Like, you don't have to necessarily. They're not hanging your school's budget over your head based on your book choice, right? They might say, hey, maybe don't come back with that book next time. That's cool, but you did it. You got in there and you discussed some seriously human, essential, vital topics. So you can kind of consider yourself playing with house money. Ask big questions. Bring books in there that, watch whatever's happening on Twitter. See what's on the top of that book pile they're burning. Those are the ones I'm bringing Saturday to read to these kids, and see, that's how I would say you have discretionary power. You have access to be creatively insubordinate in ways that teacher, you don't face the same consequences teachers are facing right now. So that would be my thought on that possibility.
Well, and Greg, I want to build off on that a little bit. And Ashford, sorry if I'm jumping in when I shouldn't be, but having, nowhere does it really explicitly state that children cannot have conversations around those prohibited concepts. And so our teachers need that really strong training in how to facilitate conversation and also let children carry that lift of thinking. Let them carry that, the cognitive lift, let them carry the cognitive load. But if we are teaching children to be critical thinkers, and we are teaching them that it is okay to have opinions and to express those opinions, and that what they think, what they've experienced, what they believe is valid, then many of those conversations are going to flow in your classroom.
Man, powerful, just powerful. Many of the things, there's a book that I'm gonna share. This book right here, if anybody has this book, We Shall Overcome, it has a lot of those, and it's a press photographs of Nashville during the civil rights era. It has a lot of the books, it has a lot of the pictures in there that Greg will allude to, but also many don't know, right? When we equate equity or inequities, sometimes we think of what's in front of us. Oh, it must have just happened. There was a school that was bombed at the height of the Brown versus Board of Education movement, Hattie Cotton here, because of one child was going to integrate that school, right? So we just have to look at the timeline of how inequities came to be to give us a greater sense of understanding the breadth of the systemic issues that we face. This is not just a one-off. It didn't just happen under this administration, under this mayor. This has been consistent over a decades period of time. And just think Nashville, I would suggest everybody go and visit on YouTube, the Public Education Foundation by Design, just so you can get some context of the history of this, just from Brown via Board, right? We're not going to go talk about the history of racial inequity in America. We're just going to talk about Brown via the Board. Go and view that as well.
Ashford, can I just pop in real quick? Two things. One, it is interesting, the journey to read about Nashville's journey to be named a unified, after Brown v. Board, you were named unified or segregated. We weren't named unified until 1998. right? 1998,
Yeah.
we have memories of that. We all can talk about whatever we're doing then. And that journey is pretty remarkable. But before that, and to speak to Melissa's point there, a book I can't recommend highly enough is Lies My Teacher Told Me by Dr. James Lowen. Pretty much anything by Dr. James Lowen. We were fortunate to spend time with him before he passed a couple of months ago in small workshops and in planning sessions. He is famous for a lot of reasons. He took a case all the way to the Supreme Court and won when trying to use primary sources in middle school. He had written a textbook, it was banned, he sued to get it unbanned and won that suit. He rooted a lot of this stuff in all of us and as teachers and practitioners in the classroom. You stoke that curiosity with a kid, and you can do that in a lot of different ways, right? You can set up and say, hey, you know, there's a lot of folks in town don't think you're ready for a picture like this. I think I'll probably not show it to you. They said, what picture? Well, I don't think it's appropriate to show you right now. It's probably not a good idea because it might upset some folks. Well, I want to see a picture. That might make some, you know, you show them that picture, say, oh, what about this would have made me upset, right? I don't know. Let's dig in. You can stoke that curiosity. You can use a primary source, which was the heart of his Supreme Court lawsuit. He had included a photograph of a lynching in the neighborhood in the school he was teaching, and they said he couldn't. He said it's from the newspaper, so that was why it got away to the Supreme Court. But that book right there, Lies My Teacher Told Me, really does speak a lot to the textbooks and standards, but also the ways in which we can stoke that curiosity in our students to help them lead that way. Because you're right, Mary. There's, you know, they're not going to be able to legislate curiosity yet, and they're probably working on it right now. But so far they haven't.
It might be.
Man, we have about 15 minutes left, so I do want to jump into this. There's a book, and I know we talk about these things. There's a book that I really wanted to highlight. We Can't Teach What We Don't Know. White Teachers, Multiracial Schools, right? And I think it's by Gary Howard. I think that's an extraordinary book because we talked earlier about teacher prep programs. And sometimes our teacher prep programs, we're trying to work with them to build them into the 21st century, but they're not, as of today, preparing our educators to go into multicultural classrooms. Nashville, just metro traditional public schools, we have 142 different languages spoken, 46 different countries of origin, and that comes with challenges. So we also talk about linguistic equity and what does that mean for our biracial students. But I think that book is one that really speaks to me. I'm going to ask a quick question of folks before we go into final thoughts from everybody. But this is an important question. I'm going to start with Dr. Gibbs. How important is it to, when we ground ourselves in equity, how important is it to us to first start with history and then jump into where we are, the personal space? Or should we start personal and then backtrack to history of where we got here?
You know, it's built on a thought process. You don't know where you're going if you don't know where you came from. So understanding the history is critical as far as understanding why certain systems are shaped how they are, why certain experience are what they are. And then it gives you a little bit more information about how you need to go about disrupting that status quo and actually creating those experiences that will shift. But when I even think about looking at what we're doing right now, I think it's too big when we start to say, well, I'm going to focus on making sure teachers know this. I'm going to make sure the community knows this without starting with, like Michael Jackson told us, the man in the mirror. Oftentimes, especially as educational leaders, I hear other leaders talking about, well, I have to ensure that my teachers know this, and that, but they haven't taken the time to internalize for themselves and are clear within themselves how they're going to go about making these changes happen. So I'll definitely say we must understand the history of it. But before we go and start trying to change others' mindsets, we need to make sure that we've taken that look in the mirror and we've started to have that conversation within ourselves. Because one thing I tell educators all the time, it's great if you can sit on a panel like this and speak facts and speak the work to the community. But if you're not having these same conversations in your inner circle where you have the most influence, you're not really trying to move the work. You're just good at, you want talking points to have a perception in the community. But if you're not having these same conversations in your small network groups where you have the most impact, there's no way that you can genuinely believe you're going to have that greater good impact. So I will say start with the history, but before we go and start trying to change others' minds, we need to make sure that we start with that man in the mirror and make sure that we have that right mindset before we can dig into this work.
Greg, can you answer that question in 1 minute, Greg?
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry. I got lost.
So from your vantage point, as you work with educators, are you starting with educators first on the history, the timeline of how we got here?
No, sorry. No, it's very similar to Dr. Gibbs. It's an identification of our own personal race story and history of understanding where we fit in that context. It's just that we do a lot of instruction on mindfulness. You can't teach someone mindfulness if we don't have a mindfulness practice. You can't teach someone to become culturally responsive and aware if you yourself are not culturally responsive and aware. That's challenging, upsetting, traumatic work at times. It's the most important piece though. So absolutely the history of where we come from and the history of Nashville and the history of the larger context beyond that is essential to be learned once we have an understanding of who we are in our hearts and the work and responsibilities, obligations we have ourselves. I think I got it under a minute.
Mary, you have anything to add to that?
So I'll echo all of those things. I think it's really important that we explore our own identity markers, and then we equip those that we are supporting in this work in the engagement in exploration of their own. And I think it's really important to note here, it can be an uncomfortable conversation. I mean, if you want to, and coming from the perspective of a white, middle-class female who's had just about every, privilege there is to have, I realize that my conversation can be really uncomfortable if I'm trying to engage someone who maybe is different from me, and that I perceive to be that way. When, of course, I've done this long enough to know that it's really not all that uncomfortable, as long as we are approaching things in a way that is supportive and from a place of discovery and exploration. But it is especially important to me that we look at our new teachers and we look at, as some of our seasoned, but we look at people who are coming in who have never encountered the diversity that they may see in some of Nashville's classrooms. Because I think that to expect someone to be totally prepared coming straight out of a prep program or a college program and walking into a classroom where they may experience things that they've never seen before and expecting them to get it all within, a week, 2 weeks, is not fair to them either. So we have to realize what kind of process, we have to be urgent about it, but we have to be very clear in what our organization's expectations are for the way that we treat children and we treat each other.
Man, great panel. Happy to be a part of this group, working with everybody collectively. I think, Greg, you said something profound. We talked offline about this. There aren't any jobs for charter school students that are separate from traditional MNPS students, right? And I always contend with education as a liberating factor, not just as a job training program, but education as a way that we create the citizenry, we create the minds and the lived individuals that understand love, being loved, and being in community, not just how to go and get a job somewhere. That's important as well, but there's so much more that education is supposed to be about. So I want to close us out here. And Mary, I'm gonna start with you. 2 minutes, just your final thoughts on culturally responsive pedagogy, things you're working on, and how the community can support you and your organization.
Sure. So, I'll just be upfront and honest and authentic. I really believe that public education is one of the biggest ways that we can level the playing field. But we have to but in order to do that, we have to believe firmly that it's a moral obligation that we have to lift up all students. And so I think for us, we are really focusing on how we can get down to a granular level of meeting the needs of every child who walks through our door. And at Lead Public Schools, we have a really large population of students who come from other countries, who are English learners. And so how do we make our experience as enriching and engaging for our English learner as we do from a child who has not had that same kind of experience? And so we are, so for us, it's a fundamental way to think about how we are reaching children and how we are reaching their families. And so so one of the things that we have grappled with as an organization is ensuring that our families have access to their children's, our information regarding their children's education. We're making a switch right now to enhance the progress reports that we send out to families so that they are absolutely in the family's home language. Because if a family can't access their child's progress report, we can't really expect them to fully engage and help their child. So there are small steps that we are able to take to ensure that we are bringing in all aspects of that. One of the things that we have recently incorporated into what we're doing is work towards the seal of biliteracy for our students who are multilingual learners, and MNPS does this as well. But I had the opportunity to grade the essays recently for our middle school students who were on the seal of biliteracy pathway. And one of the questions is, why is it important to be a multilingual learner? And the responses really were enlightening, because I looked at, I read responses from 7th graders who said, I am the primary translator for my family. So it's important for me to be able to help my parent get a job, because I can help read the job applications for my dad. So it is important as a school that we are addressing not only what the needs of those children are, but how we are also wrapping our arms around their families and helping them be part of that as well. And then when I think about culturally responsive education, it goes beyond academics. It also goes to making sure that our expectations and what we really hold, the standard to which we hold our children is the same across the board. And when I say same, I mean, we're not settling for those wrong answers or those half answers because we feel sorry for, or we feel that a child is not capable of getting to the right answer. When we establish a classroom culture that really says, okay, not yet, work, build upon this, you can get there, and I believe that you can do this. It basically rises the level for all of our kids. So there's a lot to unpack. I could talk for more than 2 minutes, but I'll stop. But I think that really making sure that we are not loving our kids back into poverty and low expectations, because that focus on, we really believe that kids can get there is what makes it so important across the board for our educators.
Man, very, very well said. Very well said. Dr. Gibbs, coming to you, same question. Just final thoughts, how the community can support and help you, and what we need to be working on.
So I'll come at it from a couple different points. First off, how can you support Warner? I would just say, come visit, come see the work. I tell people, I never want anyone to make an assumption about any school in Metro schools if you've never stepped foot inside that school. So make sure that you come visit, see the work. Then that way you can, make your opinions and make informed decisions about how that you can better serve our community. But similar to what Mary said, as we're moving forward in this work, it's going to be critical that not only all educators, but also all community members begin to understand that our children will do whatever we ask them to do, but they will only do what we ask them to do. So if we know as a community, we want our young people to reach level 10, we can't create that expectation and say, well, it's okay for certain students to make it to 10, but it's okay for other students to just get to 5, and let's celebrate them because they've made it so far. If the expectation is 10, the expectation is 10 for everybody. Now, the way we get to 10 may be a little different because Ricky may already be at a 9, and I just need a little encouragement to make it to 10, where Greg may be starting from 1. He may require extra supports to get to that 10. But if the expectation is 10, the expectation is 10, no matter where our young people live, the family background, the culture, racial, family structures. We want to make sure that that expectation is across the board. And when we get to that point as a community and understand that the expectation is the expectation for all of our young people to be successful, but also realize that it's going to take different resources and different strategies to ensure that all of our young people make it to that point, I think that's when we're going to be moving in the right direction. And that's where I will challenge our community, the Nashville community, the greater Tennessee community, the educational community for all over our country to begin moving in that direction.
Great. I know we're at time.
I'll keep it real short, just to pitch, if you don't mind, for EDCO a little bit.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for being on here at Ashford, for hosting such an excellent event. You're right, Dawn. This what really was amazing. I'm so grateful for the chance to meet with everybody like this. The Educators Cooperative is an independent nonprofit based here in Nashville, and there are a couple of ways we could really use your help. We are intentionally like pedantic and focused on pedagogy and classroom-based practices, which is great for us, but we could use a hand boosting our signal. So if you don't follow us on the socials, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, please do so. And then please help share some of those, to retweet some of those things, engage with that stuff. It makes a big difference for us. We can start to grow our footprint. We've been here since 2016. The work we do is making a difference in many classrooms, but we could use a hand with that. We also host open events. We hope events that are open to the public. All of our anti-racist panels with all the people we brought in from across the country are always open to members of the community. June 22nd, we'll be hosting another workshop here in Nashville in person to demonstrate all of the efforts and products of our cross-sector collaboration and unit development. I did put in the chat, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Mary. I didn't know it was going to pop up while you were talking. The flyer for our summer workshop, we still have a couple of spots open. It's a 5-day workshop open to all teachers in all settings, all grades, and all subjects. It's fully free for any teacher. Public, private, and charter are welcome. We have a few spots available for the cohort 8. It'll be the 8th cohort of teachers we bring to the protocol practices and collaboration practices of EDCO. If there are teachers in your lives, we would greatly appreciate you sending that flyer to them and encouraging them to apply. I'm lucky enough to have two board members on the call today. Dr. Gibbs and Ashford are both members of our board of directors. Our board is growing. If you're interested in participating at that level, it would be a huge I guess, devotion to the sorts of community engagement to make this work happen. So if you're interested, please. There's my email and the website. So that's it. I mean, donations are always appreciated for independent nonprofits. We kind of are the only channel right now in Nashville. LEAs are not allowed to teach about critical race theory. No one does anyway, but not to teach about all sorts of essential history things, but we can, as an independent 501c3, we can make sure that teachers get exactly what they need when they need that. So helping us boost our signal, engaging in our public events, sharing events with teachers in your lives. And if you're curious about the board, please reach out. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Man, thanks, Greg. I'm going to turn it over to Dawn to close us out. But man, thank everybody for being with us. Thank you for going over 3 minutes on our a lot of time. We ask you for that grace. There's a lot of good information going on. There's a lot of good things going on in public education, but as it was said earlier, as a city, we need to really hone in and think about what Kimberly Crenshaw has coined the intersectionality of all of this, of race, class, gender, industry. It is not up to education and the education leaders alone to solve this issue. It has to be a communal or village issue, as Dr. Gibbs said earlier. Kimberly Crenshaw is coming out with a book later on this year, Intersectionality, where she clearly draws those through lines between city, education, student, and family. And I think it's important that now that we are creating new norms coming out of COVID, I'm hoping in COVID, wherever we are right now, we can't go back, right, to what was easy, what was comfortable, because we have at bare minimum 60 years of data from Brown versus Board that what was taking place wasn't beneficial to Black kids, the brown kids, or poor kids. And I want to focus educators and everybody to always think about disaggregating the data to make certain that we are achieving equity, right? But Don, I turn it over to you. Thank you. Thank you for all the panelists on here. Looking forward to our next conversation and really putting things in place to move this forward.
Thank you so much. Amazing leaders. As a fellow educator, I love it because I get what you produce in the higher ed space. So thank you for all of your hard work. Greg, Dr. Gibbs, Mary Lawrence, Ashford, you all are amazing. You hear my lovely son. He's even excited about it. All of you who have stayed the course, thank you so much. We will be sending out this recording to you, and you will also get all of the amazing resources that we have put into the chat. So thank you so much. Continue to live, learn, and grow, and we'll see you next time. Be sure to check out our website at cnm.org for more conversations, training, and development. Have a good evening.